Welcome to my course on the fourth domain on building a strong cybersecurity posture for our organizations based on the ECC requirements. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important topic, third-party cybersecurity. As you can see, the objective of this subdomain is to ensure the protection of assets against the cybersecurity risks related to third parties, including outsourcing and managed services, in accordance with organizational policies and procedures, and related laws and regulations. To fulfill the NCA ECC requirements, there are several controls and points that must be implemented and tracked. For example, cybersecurity requirements for contracts and agreements with third parties must be identified, documented, and approved. Let's take a look at an example of how this might play out in real life. Imagine that your organization is outsourcing some IT services to a third-party provider. Before signing the contract, you must conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment to ensure the availability of risk mitigation controls. This could include reviewing the provider's security policies, conducting a penetration test, or reviewing their compliance with relevant regulations such as the NCA ECC. To assist with this process, there are a number of tools and technologies that can be used to conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment. For example, vulnerability management software can be used to identify and prioritize vulnerabilities, and track progress on remediation. So, as you can see, managing third-party cybersecurity is a critical part of ensuring the overall security of your organization. It's important to understand the importance of third-party cybersecurity when it comes to protecting your organization's assets. The ECC requirement 4:1 focuses on ensuring that proper measures are in place to mitigate the risks related to third parties, including outsourcing and managed services. To meet this requirement, it's important to have clear and defined cybersecurity requirements in place for contracts and agreements with third parties. This includes non-disclosure clauses and secure removal of the organization's data by third parties upon the end of service, communication procedures in case of cybersecurity incidents, and requirements for third parties to comply with organizational policies, laws, and regulations. In addition, when it comes to IT outsourcing and managed services, it's crucial to conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment to ensure the availability of risk mitigation controls before signing contracts and agreements, or upon changes in related regulatory requirements. Also, cybersecurity managed services centers for monitoring and operations must be completely present inside the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Overall, having a comprehensive approach to third-party cybersecurity is essential in order to effectively protect the organization's assets and ensure compliance with the ECC requirements. Control 4.1.1. Starting with 4.1.1, it's important to identify and document the cybersecurity requirements for contracts and agreements with third parties. This includes making sure that any contracts and agreements that may affect the organization's data or services include specific clauses related to cybersecurity. Moving on to 4.1.2, the cybersecurity requirements for contracts and agreements with third parties should include non-disclosure clauses and secure removal of the organization's data by third parties upon the end of service. Additionally, it's important to have clear communication procedures in place in case of a cybersecurity incident, as well as requirements for the third party to comply with related organizational policies and procedures, laws, and regulations. When it comes to the requirement of 4.1.2.1 in the ECC's subdomain 4:1 on third-party cybersecurity, it's important to have non-disclosure clauses in contracts and agreements with third-party vendors that handle the organization's data. These clauses should clearly outline the confidentiality obligations of the third party and any penalties for non-compliance. Additionally, it's important to include provisions for the secure removal of the organization's data by the third party upon the end of their service. This can include requirements for data destruction or returning of data to the organization, as well as any necessary verification or certification of data removal. To meet this requirement, organizations can use tools and technology such as data leak prevention software, which can monitor and control data transmissions, and data erasure software, which can securely wipe data from devices and storage media. Additionally, organizations can use encryption to protect sensitive data during transmission and storage. As an example, a financial institution may have a third-party vendor handle customer account data, so they would include a non-disclosure clause in their contract with the vendor and also require the vendor to securely wipe any data from their systems upon termination of the contract. It's also important to have regular reviews and audits of the third-party vendor's compliance with the non-disclosure and data removal clauses in the contract, to ensure that they are following the organization's requirements and regulations. The second point of 4.1.2.2 is that organization and the third-party vendor, what information needs to be shared, and how quickly this information needs to be shared. This plan should also include clear roles and responsibilities for different members of the organization and the vendor, as well as procedures for escalation and decision-making in the event of an incident. One example of a tool that can be used to meet this requirement is an incident response platform, IRP, that facilitates communication and coordination during an incident response process. This type of platform allows multiple parties to share information and collaborate in real time during an incident, which can help to ensure that everyone is aware of what is happening and what actions need to be taken. Additionally, it can also provide incident management and incident tracking capabilities to track progress and measure the success of the incident response. Another example is an incident response plan template that can be customized to specific use case and organization to ensure that all necessary procedures are in place. This can be shared with third-party vendors as a part of the contract and agreement. It's important to note that communication procedures should be tested and practiced regularly to ensure they are effective and efficient. In order to meet the requirement of 4.1.2.3, organizations in Saudi Arabia must ensure that third-party contractors and service providers comply with all relevant laws, regulations, and organizational policies related to cybersecurity. This includes compliance with the National Cybersecurity Authority's ECC regulations, as well as any other relevant laws and regulations issued by other authorities. One way to ensure compliance is to include specific language in contracts and agreements with third parties that outlines the requirements for compliance and the consequences for non-compliance. For example, organizations can include clauses that require third parties to comply with all relevant laws and regulations, and to implement and maintain appropriate cybersecurity controls and procedures. Organizations can also require third parties to provide regular reports or certifications demonstrating compliance. Another important step is to conduct regular audits and assessments of third-party contractors and service providers to ensure that they are meeting their obligations under the contract and maintaining compliance with relevant laws and regulations. This can be done by using technology tools such as automated compliance management software, which can help organizations track and monitor compliance, and generate reports on the status of compliance. In addition to conducting regular assessments, organizations can also use threat intelligence feeds and vulnerability management software to monitor for potential security risks related to third parties. This can include monitoring for potential threats or vulnerabilities associated with third-party systems, software, or services, and taking action to mitigate or remediate any risks that are identified. Overall, the key to meeting the requirements of 4.1.2.3 is to have a robust process in place for managing and monitoring third-party compliance, which includes clear and defined policies, procedures, and requirements, and the use of technology tools and resources to support the process. Control 4.1.3. In 4.1.3, when dealing with IT outsourcing and managed services third parties, it's important to conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment to ensure that adequate risk mitigation controls are in place before signing contracts and agreements, or upon changes in related regulatory requirements. Additionally, cybersecurity managed services centers for monitoring and operations must be completely present inside the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. When it comes to conducting a cybersecurity risk assessment for third-party contracts and agreements in Saudi Arabia, it's important to understand the specific regulatory requirements set by the National Cybersecurity Authority, NCA, and any other relevant authorities. One key requirement is that a risk assessment must be conducted before signing contracts or agreements, or whenever there are changes in related regulatory requirements. A risk assessment is a process of identifying, assessing, and prioritizing the risks to an organization's assets, including its data and systems, that may be caused by third-party relationships. This process can help an organization understand the potential impact of a cybersecurity incident and identify the controls that are needed to mitigate those risks. To conduct a risk assessment, an organization can use a variety of tools and techniques, such as questionnaires, interviews, and penetration testing. Some examples of popular tools include NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF, which is a widely recognized framework for identifying and managing cybersecurity risks. ISO 27001, which is an international standard for information security management that provides a systematic approach for identifying and managing security risks. COBIT 5, which is a framework for governance and management of enterprise IT that includes guidance for managing third-party risks. It's important to note that these frameworks and standards can also be used to evaluate the cybersecurity posture of third-party vendors and service providers, which is an essential part of the risk assessment process. In addition, to meet the requirement of 4.1.3.2, cybersecurity managed services centers for monitoring and operations must be completely present inside the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's important to ensure that any third-party vendor or service provider that will be handling your organization's sensitive data or systems has a physical presence within the country. This can help ensure that the vendor or provider is subject to the same regulatory requirements as your organization and that any incidents can be promptly dealt with. In conclusion, conducting a cybersecurity risk assessment for third-party contracts and agreements is an important step in ensuring that your organization's assets are protected from cybersecurity risks related to third parties. Using a recognized framework or standard, such as NIST CSF, ISO 27001, or COBIT 5, can help guide the assessment process and ensure that all relevant risks are identified and mitigated. One way to conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment before signing contracts and agreements with third parties in Saudi Arabia is to use a standardized framework, such as NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF. This framework provides a common language and methodology for identifying and managing cybersecurity risks, and can be customized to meet the specific requirements of the organization and any related regulatory requirements. Additionally, specialized software tools such as threat modeling and vulnerability scanning tools can be used to identify potential vulnerabilities and risks associated with the third party's systems and services. Control 4.1.4. Finally, 4.1.4 emphasizes the importance of regularly reviewing the cybersecurity requirements for contracts and agreements with third parties to ensure they remain up to date and effective. To meet these requirements, organizations can use tools such as contract management software, risk assessment tools, and incident management software. These will help in identifying, documenting, and approving the cybersecurity requirements for contracts and agreements with third parties, conducting risk assessment, and implementing the incident management procedures. It's also important to have a clear communication plan in place to ensure that all stakeholders are aware of the third-party cybersecurity procedures and know what to do in case of an incident. It is also recommended to have a clear chain of custody for the handling of data with third parties, meaning that there is a clear understanding of who is responsible for creating, maintaining, and securing the data while being handled by third party. Overall, the key is to have a robust and well-planned third-party cybersecurity strategy in place to protect the organization's data and information from any cyber risks associated with third party.